first of all, thank you so much for your interesting content, very interesting presentation. So we have a few questions that came in from the audience. The first one is from Alex in Australia. And the question is, can you tell us about the use of different social media in communication strategies?
I guess the choice of different social media depends on the choice of, who you are and who your audience is. I've found it really interesting moving from, kind of mass market, so B2C communication work in Hong Kong to, very much the B2B stuff I'm doing now in Australia. Because, not only do I look at that in terms of, I'm still talking to people in both cases, both the nature of the conversation and also the country in which I'm operating means that there are very, very different social media channels, but also different ways of using the ones that exist across both. So, for example, in Hong Kong, I wouldn't use Twitter. It's not really a relevant channel for me. But Facebook, in a B2C context, is invaluable. And making sure you're actually crafting stuff that's right for your audience and right for that channel. And, that's things like making sure you're using images, video embedded, some text, and making sure you're actually responding and having conversations on the wall of Facebook, I think, is very, very important for Hong Kong. Whereas for Australia, and again, moving into a situation here where I'm looking more B2B, but even looking at the B2C side, there's less room in Australian people's lives for brands on Facebook than in a lot of other countries. So it can be much more difficult to get in there. And I've seen that actually factor out in a couple of other ways in that, in Hong Kong, Facebook, or posting to Facebook as a brand, you would actually do it far more frequently than you would in Australia. Similarly, I would be much quicker to use Twitter in Australia, particularly working for a tech company. And LinkedIn, I think, is useful across both. Although, again, I think is more directly relevant to a business-oriented audience. But by the same token, I'm starting to use, I guess, the expert opinions of the members of my company as opposed to a generic brand presence as I was for B2C companies when I was using LinkedIn. That's probably been a little bit specific in terms of my own experience in social media work in communication, but it really does come down to that. It's so specific. You've really got to work out where your audience is and go there as your first step, because trying to actually copy what someone else does, it's just not going to work.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Perhaps we have time to take one more question from from someone called Matthew. And the question is, how do you measure effectiveness of your communication strategy? Specifically, which metrics should be the focus?
Very good question. And in some ways there's a similar answer. It really comes down to what matters to your business. And, as you're looking at potentially communicating with a customer within context, so within the different sections of the buyer journey, you're likely to find different metrics of use. So, if you're looking at awareness, you're probably looking at things like overall impressions, whether that's social or search. You're looking at the brand awareness based on surveys. You might be looking at, how many new people you're actually getting into your blog page, your Facebook page, your LinkedIn, etc. Then moving into kind of the research area, what are you getting in terms of conversions in inverted commas, because conversion can mean anything, but how many people are filling in that form? How many people are actually subscribing to your email newsletter? How many people are actually clicking on your banner ad as a direct response to an offer? Those kinds of things. And then, out the back of that, how many sales are you actually generating? If you have an online shop, you can actually do a direct attribution. How are you actually going to work out how to attribute online activity to an in-store sale, that's actually one of the hardest things to do. And then once you're at the back of a purchase decision, how are you actually going to look at that ongoing advocacy? And so, that's essentially things like looking at going back out to social media, the share of voice and the amount of positive sentiment and those kinds of things. So it really does vary, like I said, on what you're looking at in terms of your product and your channels, but where you are also within the context of the buyer journey. So unfortunately, like my previous answer, it's a bit of a case of how long's a piece of string.